my fellow slaves of the global plantation. The Vinny Eastwood Show is bad news. It's like the news, but so much worse. It's the lighter side of genocide. Just because we're being exterminated doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. Otherwise, what's the point of being killed? The Vinny Eastwood Show. We're the only thing worse than living in a high-tech global police state run by child trafficking Satanists. It's Vinny's jokes. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live on Ground Zero Radio. Thank you very much for joining us, and bear in mind, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the show, it's a little unconventional. Conventionally, people will talk about very serious topics and be very serious about it and stress out their audience and make all these people who've gone through such persecution and stress through the course of their life in general even worse. This is not that kind of a show. My very special guest is Reynold Macpherson, formerly of Ronald McDonald House, but now of the Rotorua Residents and Ratepayers Association. And we'd try to get into this a little bit gently, softly. But no, we're just going to give you straight up, man. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do, Reynold.
I'm the chairman of the Rotorua District Residents and Ratepayers, and I've been so for the best part of a decade. It was formed originally from the Rotorua Pro-Democracy Society. From 2013 onwards, we became very concerned about attempts by the then mayor to convert our local democracy into co-governance, and we built up resistance. Prior to that, I'd been an academic and specialising in educative leadership. I've written about 17 books, and so I have a track record in that field. But it's all to do with the nature of reform of either institutions or entire systems, large government systems. And I've had 3 ministerial commissions in that area. But settling down into my retirement, I thought I could take it easy and bow out gracefully. But when confronted with a local attempt to undermine democracy, it was unacceptable to myself and many other people. So we built a campaign. So, unfortunately, when the
what is co-governance? We'll ask in a moment, but please continue.
Yeah, sorry, co-governance, the definition, it's not a bad idea. As they say in philosophy, start by defining your terms. Co-governance is where governance is shared equally between 2 parties, and they basically share power, and they therefore both have a veto on directions taken. So that's co-governance.
By that you mean a takeover?
Not entirely, because the co-governance understandings are normally hammered out between 2 parties. And one of the preconditions is that the 2 parties will agree that they both have the same degree of power. And they are going to share the decision-making, both retain, as I said, a veto. But it is a takeover with respect to setting aside other interests group. So you've got, in the case that we were facing in 2013, 2014, we had a proposal from the elected council to set up what was called a Te Aroha Partnership Plan. And this basically was taking us down the track towards co-governance between the council and Te Aroha, our local iwi. Highly respected, very well organised iwi.
And this iwi, how many people, by percentage-wise, of the Rotorua district are actually members of this iwi?
That's an interesting question, because when it comes to elections and people have to either vote on the general roll or on the Maori roll, the Maori roll constitutes 28%. 72% remain on the general roll. So that's one indication. Another, by the census, the last census we had, the actual population, counting the very large number of young rangatahi, the percentage gets up just over 40%, 41, 42%. So it's much more balanced at that level. But when it comes to voting, it's a 28, 72% split.
So what we'd be talking about if they became co-governance and had a 50% share, their 28% is almost doubled in terms of the power per vote in terms of that. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
So
you've already got your head around the numbers.
Okay, so people want to have a doubling of their power, basically, and you don't want them to just have this because...
Well, one of the precepts, it depends on your belief system. If you believe in the principles of democracy, you go along with the idea of equal suffrage, and that's colloquially defined as one person, one vote, one power. So you've got to have a very careful distribution of power going with the numbers of the various groups. So one of the early proposals for a co-governance structure was by the then council was to say, look, let's have equal numbers, 3 in the general ward, 3 seats in the general ward, 3 seats for the Maori ward, and the other 4 seats, we'll call them at large. It was an invented category, and this would give the people that were on the Maori roll and those people on the general roll would have had equal voting power. Eventually, this was resisted very, very strongly, and was eventually taken off to the local government commission. But at the same time, a local bill was taken to Parliament, and that local bill in Parliament encountered a very stern resistance. Locally, the Te Arawa, there's an elected group from Te Arawa itself. It's representative of all the different factions, the various groups within Te Arawa, and that group is called Te Tātou Te Arawa, the Gathering of Te Arawa. And Te Tātou decided no, it would go along, if they were given equal power, they'd go along with it, but their preference was proportional representation. That is, on a 10-seat council, a split, 7 seats for general to reflect their 72% of the population that were voting, and 3 seats to represent the 28% on the Maori roll. And that went up to Parliament, and lo and behold, the Attorney General turned and said, no, that's wrong. You may not have a local bill that allows you to do that because it will discriminate against non-Maori voters. In other words, the general, people on the general roll.
As opposed to discriminating in favour of those on the Māori roll.
Yes. Well, he didn't put the argument that way. He was quite careful to say no. Human rights guaranteed in law insists that we have basically proportional representation, or if you will, equal suffrage. Our votes have the same power.
Well, if I may, the Bill of Rights also states, I believe under Section 14, that we guarantee you all these rights unless we say you don't have them, because we've come up with some sort of circumstance, contrived or otherwise. You've got all these rights, but you don't actually have any of these rights enshrined. It's not constitutional. It's just a bill, you know, one for you to pay for with your freedom.
Well, there you go. And that's one of those lovely conundrums, that we have these things called laws, and we rely on our leaders to go along with the laws, or we sort of undermine the legitimacy of law.
Is that a conundrum, or is that racketeering? I'm loose on the details when it comes to New Zealand government structure, but continue, please.
Well, there's a lovely term the Americans coined called gerrymandering. It meant basically where you manipulate the boundaries of constituencies, or you manipulate the powers of various groups within a society so that you get the outcome you want. Now, that does not square off with the principles of democracy. The other interesting thing was that the local government commission looked into the whole thing at about the same time. And they came out and said, no, you may not proceed on the proposed basis. And instead, we're going to determine that we're going to have a general ward, that's 7 councillors. One of them will be strictly for rural people to vote for, 6 for the general members of the general ward, and 3 seats, a 3-seat Maori ward. And we came out and a number of people, including some of our members, took a hostile position because of all this raruraru, or disputes, because of all this this controversy. They said, no, we're all got to be equal, so therefore there should be no such thing as Maori wards. A Maori ward, that's racist, was their claim, and it will lead to apartheid. Well, with respect, the majority of people in RDRR said, no, we've got to respect people's right to associate as they wish to for political purposes. And if they wish to form a party and wish to form a set of associations and prosecute their interests in a ward termed a Maori ward, then the rest of us should respect that. And that was our position. And we actually came out in favour of a Maori ward. And that's what happened with under the decision by the local government commission, we adopted a 6 and 1 and 3 seat distribution. And that's what we've got at the moment.
And is that working for you?
Pretty well, yes. The impression that I've got, and I watch the council perform online pretty regularly, and by and large, under new leadership, the mayor, by the way, did not stand again. There was a lot of hostility. She did not stand again, nor did her deputy mayor and members of her ruling group. It was like a coalition of people around her. They were either voted out or they didn't stand again, and they were replaced. And the new group that we've got in council, led by Tanya Tapsell, is much more moderate. It seems to be far more relaxed and listening to people far more, less doctrinaire. And the upshot is a great deal of trust has grown, and there have been some glitches, some difficulties, but on average, I would say the council's probably performing, as far as policy making and policy implementation goes, it's far more effective and it's far more democratic.
With the loss of so many councillors, including the mayor, in the subsequent elections prior to, after this debate and this restructuring, yes, if it were, was there any pushback in an extra particular political way from the Māori iwi or supporters of them? Because we see this happen in New Zealand quite significantly, where you will have these official figurehead organisations who on paper are all very nice and friendly, and you meet them and they're very cordial and what have you, but then, and this occurs for both sides of the debate really, you got those people who sort of take the law and politics into their own hand, and instead of using cordiality, instead of using minutes from meetings and discussion, they use threats, violence and intimidation and things of that nature in order to influence political decisions their way. Has there been any of this resulting from this so-called debacle?
The debate during the period of 2013 through to about 2018, it was the representation review after that, the hostility gradually grew, and through that period when we were looking at a structure, a review of the structure that went off to Parliament, that was quite a hostile period. A very small number of activists out on the extremes became far more vocal and closely affiliated with Te Pāti Māori locally. They became quite angry and characterised any attempt to counter their arguments as racist. And a number of us who come from families where it's best to describe them as multicultural or at least bicultural, but with blended cultures, we we had to learn not to take offence. We just regarded that as a form of argumentation that was quite unconvincing. It certainly angered some of our members to be referred to as racist. But then once we had the settlement in Parliament, the heat dropped out of it very quickly indeed, and we settled down into the process of running normal elections and so on in 2022. And we thought at that stage, very trusting as we are, that democracy had won and the nonsense was over. But I was a bit alarmed recently to discover that in the long-term plan from 2024 to 2034, there is explicit provision for the establishment of a new committee called the Te Arawa 2050 Vision Committee. And this new Vision Committee is going to, as far as I can see, it comprises the councillors, all elected members, plus 5 people from Te Tautau o Te Arawa that I mentioned before. And they're going to be advised by Te Arawa Partnership Manahautu. It's a senior official who spends all of his time furthering Te Arawa's political interests in and around council. I trust I'm not being too unfair, but that's this new subcommittee, which will be talking directly to council, has been given essentially the power to determine Rotorua's vision for 2030 to replace the Vision 2030. The council's Vision 2030 runs out, of course, in 2030, but Te Arawa has already developed their own Te Arawa vision for up to 2050, and the latter, I think, could easily subvert the determinations that were worked into the 2030 vision. This might sound arcane until you realise
not to me, but continue.
Right. Vision gets converted into purposes. Purposes get converted into structure. Structure then gets converted into programs, allocation of money, and all the policy implementation then flows. So if you capture the vision of an organisation, you capture its mission, its structure, its programs, its expenditure, everything then follows. And this would be it gets back to your word, a takeover. It would subvert the intention of our voting a council to alone make policy. But this subcommittee, this new subcommittee that they're setting up, in fact, it's had a couple of meetings already, it gets very, very close to preparing the ground for co-governance. So we're very concerned about that, and we've taken upon ourselves to write to the Minister of Local Government, Simon Watts, and we are awaiting an answer.
So, in my opinion, and I'm just taking a shot...
Hold on.
I'm just taking a shot in the dark here.
There you go for it.
By chance, do a whole bunch of these people who are so interested in co-governance also have an interest in United Nations Agenda 21 implementation, which Agenda 21 has quote-unquote Agenda 2030 goals already, which are probably identical to what these goals that you're talking about, that this organisation are putting out are, because they're not really that original. And also UN Agenda 21 has UN Agenda 2030 and 50, right? These are what Rosa Corey in her book UN Agenda 21 Behind the Green Mask called milestones. And what they do is, in accordance with, I might be going a bit far afield to pull this reference, but I can assure you the mechanism does work well, is Adam Weishaupt's formation of the Illuminati. And in the document that was obtained from a horseman who was struck by lightning, they found out that this organization was going to basically take over all the kingdoms and all the queens and all the kings and all the king's men, so on and so forth, because of the methodology that they follow with regards to what we now call scamming. All right? Here's how you do it. Let's say you're coming in for a political scam of some description, and then people find out your scam under its current name. You change the name of the scam, and you take it underground for a little bit until people forget about it. And then you bring it back, and you push it again. It works masterfully. Regardless of how long a time frame you're really talking about here, people can scam. And with the exact same scam, keep scamming under a different guise. So what if co-governance is just another name for the scam of United Nations international governance under a world government, which subverts quote-unquote democracy, which is just, I guess, mob rule, if you wanted to use the original Greek translation, or if you wanted to use the American translation, two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. And a republic, on the other hand, would be where the sheep has a gun. So we've been disarmed in New Zealand now, of course. And what happens directly after this is we go into massive lockdowns, which are basically, if you look at those human rights that aren't actually enshrined as rights in New Zealand, violates damn near every single one of them. And of course, we saw what happened in the Wellington protests as people wanted to protest that particular thing, as they're entitled to do under that mythical Bill of Rights. And what happened to them? Pepper spray happened to them. Sound cannons happened to them. Police with riot shields and bashing old ladies and breaking old men's hips happened. Okay? New Zealand is no longer a democracy. Okay? Perhaps it's always been what I was referred to as a elected dictatorship. Now, the true governance of New Zealand, in my opinion, was told to me through Penny Bright. It's not actually the local government New Zealand's job to yay or okay New Zealand local government policy, as Mayor Michael Faden from the Wairarapa once told me, is that when he wanted to get hemp and other farming practices legalised in his district and push that agenda, he found that his council wasn't actually allowed to make those decisions. They went to a branch called Local Government New Zealand, which is a private corporation. And its members include the largest infrastructure organisations and corporations that New Zealand currently has. And those organisations themselves are also members of other groups that basically yay or nay our governance, for example, Infrastructure New Zealand. So what we've got really is a dictatorship corporatocracy trying to masquerade as though it's like nice and kind, so nobody actually gets up in arms, and meanwhile their arms, before they get up, are handcuffed behind them, and we're all slaves. Roundabout in a general kind of way. That's how I feel that the situation is going on. And when it comes to argumentation, name-calling, you're a racist because such and blah, blah, blah. You know, these are just pathetic little childish tactics that happen to work throughout history. You get people riled up in a cult-like mentality full of hate and vile and vitriol, and the central belief structure, which is our way, is the only way. And that's how you get conflict. That's how you get slavery. And I don't like it happening in this country. And I've only just really recently, like within the last 20 years, become aware that this structure is actually happening here. And Penny Bright helped me to see that before she died. And when we went to the court case where Graham McCready managed to get a conviction of John Banks, former mayor of Auckland and former head of the National ACT Party and former head of the police, convicted for corruption, he said that when Penny and Vince Seamer from kiwisfirst.co.nz, who were both court watchdogs at the time, came and told him about the corruption, he said they must have been telling it to me gently and lightly, because it's much, much worse than I'd ever possibly imagined. That is the terrifying situation that we hold here in New Zealand in regards to international context, because it is everybody in every country who has very similar processes happening right now under different names. Apologise for that exceedingly gratuitous rant.
No, not at all. No. Very interesting views. I don't agree with all of them, but I take your point.
So you say that these people have an end goal in sight? Like, let's say, for example, what is it now and what is it they actually want it to be in the worst possible light, really? Because I find it very difficult to talk about things and people's schemes and what have you by being nice to them. You know, we've got a problem with niceness in New Zealand, John Ansell tells me.
Well, I'd prefer that we are reasonably nice. It's possible to disagree without being nastily disagreeable. So I'd ask people to think through their positions with care, listen to other people very carefully, and if possible, to dig deeper and understand the mix of values that are being used to promulgate various positions. And you ask, what is the essence of what people want when they're involved in politics, local politics? And the answer, of course, is power. They want power. They want power to determine how resources, the sort of degree of resources to be gathered through rates and other mechanisms, how to set priorities and how to service some groups' interests necessarily at cost to others, because there's a limited amount of money available. And one of the tragic things that's facing councils, many councils, including ours, and ours is up to a $450 million debt level of concern, and that they're going to increase probably over 500 million in a few years' time so they can afford the water infrastructure. Ours is in fairly good shape compared to many districts, but locally we're going to have that degree of expenditure to stay on top. But one of the great tragedies of the previous national administration, Labor government, was that they empowered councils, if they wished, to get into providing not just core services, but cater for well-being. And they spoke openly about cultural well-being, environmental well-being, economic well-being, and social well-being. And they left it to councils to set their own agendas. The big catch was that none of it was funded from central sources. They had to take it out of their existing budgets. And some councils did a reasonable job, and ours, in my view, went overboard into all sorts of expenditures, resulting in a dramatic acceleration of our debt. In 2013, the debt level was down to about 130 million. And that was reasonable. It was possible to see how it could be paid off and so on. But in the following 8 years, it's gone right up to the point now where, as I said, we're heading for a debt level of 450 towards $500 million. Now, this might not be as sweeping in terms of analysis as your views. You can see linkages between what's happening here in New Zealand and overseas and so on. My thinking simply goes from local levels up to our national levels, and I'll let other analysts deal with the national to international dimensions and dynamics. I'm just not across that area. I can't really comment on your views in that area, and you just accept my apology for not being able to do that.
No, that's fine, because we live in a fractal universe, which means everything is a smaller or larger version of something else. If you know one thing, one tiny little thing, you can project that out. And if it's a working system that you've analysed, you'll find out, if you start looking in other directions, that a very similar pattern emerges. You know, you zoom out and it's the same picture. You keep zooming out, it's the same picture. Very similar. So if you understand local government issues, you probably understand international issues more than anybody who studies them, generally speaking, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
So, for example, council level, the council debt level, right?
Yes.
Is it true that if the council has a certain budget and then it goes over that budget and gets into debt in one fiscal year, it will then have a larger budget the next year, which includes that debt as its funding, right? So, we've got $100 million budget and we've gone $100 million over budget, so next year we need a $200 million budget. And they just keep consistently getting themselves into debt to their creditors, usually using private contractors, which Penelope Bright, hate to reference her again, discovered through her Official Information Act request that and international corroboration on these points as well, that local contractors are on average half the price of private contractors, right? And so if you've got private contracting going on, there's a lot of money in the till that starts changing hands as they start clipping the tickets. And therefore, if you've got kids to feed, if you've got houses that you need to have over their head, you have a vested interest in trying to make sure that that government stays in debt so that you can keep getting paid, that you can still keep providing for yourself and my workers and so on and so forth. Yeah, but it's like, bro, you're building stuff in an inefficient way that is destroying society and enriching you in a way that is not better for everybody. That's private business, okay? That's not governance. That's not democracy. This is not how these things are actually really supposed to work in terms of an economic fashion. And also, one of the interesting tricks I found out from Bruce Logan of the Mangawhai Residents and Ratepayers Association, he found out that what the council wants to do is when they're engaged in corruption and they want to perhaps divvy out contracts to firms that have a finger in the pie, what they'll do is they'll pick out projects that don't sound that interesting. Sanitation, water purification, so on and so forth. Things that people aren't really curious about or interested in, so that they won't actually have the gumption to go and check on the books and see where all that money is flowing through that sanitation system. If it was called something else, a river of shit system, for example, people might be interested and do a bit more scrutiny, but they don't. That's the problem with New Zealand's local government infrastructure and general practices, as far as I feel, is that it's an inherent hotbed and nest for, as you said, power. And at the moment in our society where we have energy transferred into the existence of real things or digital things that represent power, like money and power are virtually the same thing. And if that is the case, what is the oath that people are supposed to take before they undergo work at a council? You know, what are their obligations?
The elected members, the oath for elected members is quite specific. It says that they've got to, unless they declare a conflict of interest and step back from a particular decision or a particular discussion, the oath requires people to make decisions in the interests of all people in that district. Those are the words of the oath. And in my experience, the majority of, because I was elected, as you know, onto council 3 years, the majority of the people there, even though they made decisions I sometimes disagreed with, I did respect the fact that they, in all honesty, believed that they were serving the interests of everybody, not just a faction. That perhaps the faction that had given them strong support and got them voted in yet again. But the other, there's a dynamic to elections which I think are unique to local government. And in my autobiography, I got to work and demonstrated from the numbers over the years since 2013 through to 2023. I demonstrated the greatest determinant of how people vote is actually their affiliation to national political parties. Those people, those candidates that are strongly affiliated to, say, the National Party or the Labour Party or to ACT or to Party Maori, that determined pretty much their attitudes towards voting, choosing between alternative candidates. So people tend to vote in a way which reflects their commitments, their political commitments elsewhere, which reinforces the point that you've been making, that people are largely unaware of what's actually going on. For example, the decisions over planning and over consenting, resource consenting and all that, elected members have no part to play in that process at all. All that is kept from them by the officials. The next big area of infrastructure development, which is the second core business component for councillors, they get an outline of the major projects and the costs involved and so on. But once it comes to determining with great precision the options for infrastructure, the practice at Rotorua has been for expert officials to produce analyses that come to one conclusion. They provide one recommendation, and on the basis of fairly slim information, the elected members then have to make a choice: do I support this or do I not support this? And 9 times out of 10, the mayor, including the current mayor, has organised the chief opinion leaders and committee chairpersons to speak in favour of the single proposal. So it's if it is democracy, it's heavily steered democracy.
It is a
one other factor that I must draw to your attention with regard to co-governance, for example. There is colossal coherence between the demands of those that are pushing the co-governance agenda and the hidden proposal that came before, that was developed back in Labour National Government days, called He Puapua. That I've obtained and read it very carefully, and philosophically and in terms of strategy and so on, it follows exactly what you were describing. And that way of thinking became embedded for many people into their taken for granted stock of knowledge about the directions that New Zealand should be taking, and that locally, how our council, the sort of directions our council should be taking. That He Puapua agenda has been basically delegitimated by the last national election, and yet it's regularly pointed out that this department and that department are still running on He Puapua assumptions. So some of these ideas, when they become embedded deeply within bureaucracies, they're very hard to shape and shake. And it goes back to, who invented bureaucracy? It's a character called Max Weber, a German sociologist. And he invented it basically after the First World War to help governments around the world who manage the massive complexity of increasing modernizing computer with a lot of technological change. And he invented bureaucracy as a neutral way for officials to manage dimensions of the economy and dimensions of our society in ways that complied with the new policies determined by elected members. And it was a brilliant scheme, and it was rapidly adopted all around the world. But the downsides of bureaucracy are extremely well known now. And I'm afraid some of these great ideas that people have that get embedded in a bureaucracy are very resistant to change. Anyway, that's forgive my lecture, but that's one of my favorite topics.
So there's 3 elements that jump out at me right there, because as you were talking about the governance structure, these guys create these plans basically in secret, and then they come out and tell you that this is the only plan, yes or no. All right, that's the Delphi technique, coming from the prophet of Delphi, who Alexander the Great visited, and it's just like, oh well, here's your options, and whichever option you take, it benefits us. If you say no, then that benefits us, because then we get to pay people a whole bunch of money to do even more research, which isn't really research or even backing anything up. It's just a way to create. Wait a second, it's a sales marketing scam. All right, it's just basically simple. Okay, guys, we need to
hold on. It doesn't have to be like that. It's one of the key distinctions in administrative theory for about 2-3 decades now has been that you've got to make very careful distinctions and distribution of power into the policy making as opposed to the policy implementation processes. And there's a requirement at national level in New Zealand that public officials must be politically neutral, and their job is to implement policy once it's been determined. On the other hand, it does require for policy making be in the hands of, that is the decision making, to be exclusively in the hands of the powerful people that we elect. If others, through devices like co-governance, can get to share that power, then that has subverted your policy making process. And the policy making and decision making process is well known now to include the philosophical processes, the strategic analysis processes, and the political processes. And what you're referring to is these political mechanisms that you use to persuade large numbers of people in organisations that this is indeed a right way to go. And if you can invest an idea with rightness and strategic timing and roll out the politics to implement it, then you're absolutely right. That idea has become the right thing to do.
So the basics of it is, Rosa Corey explained the anti-Delphi technique in this vein in her book, and she said that what the councils are going to do, and she was resisting United Nations Agenda 21 infrastructure development in, I think it was Sacramento County. You go into these meetings, and what people do ordinarily is if they're going to a meeting to disrupt or go against the agenda of their meeting or try to derail it or something of that nature, they make one critical mistake. They arrive and sit together so that they can be seen clearly as a group that has a particular point of view. What she proposed is that none of those people arrive together. None of those people sit together. They sit as far apart as they possibly can. And then, when the council gives you those three options that nobody wants and gets you to pick one, because obviously then you've at least had some choice in the decision making when the reality is you didn't have any, one person can go up and ask a question. And as they inevitably get shouted down by the councillors, oh, don't worry, we've got this plan, we've got to go ahead with it, then somebody on the other end of the hall stands up and says, hey, you haven't answered that gentleman's question. And they say, oh, no, we'll get to it at the end of the meeting. And then somebody out in the other corner of the meeting goes, hey, no, let's just stop this right now. I want to hear the answer to their question too. And then a couple of other people stand up, and we've only a handful of people. You can disrupt these Delphi technique meetings and force them to answer questions that they otherwise wouldn't want answered. And you know what the majority of the time happens is that those council meetings get shut down, and every agenda and idea and things of that nature that they had to do that, they have to go back to the drawing board and come back and try to do another meeting for which you can stop those two using the identical tactic. That's what I found was very interesting about you talking about the political process and people voting how they think and what have you, and sociology in particular, which is the only book that I can actually see the title of behind you, is that people are social creatures and they need social validation. And when it appears that the crowd is not going with you, that loses their control over the situation and makes them politically vulnerable.
Look, I go along with what you're saying. I've seen examples here in Rotorua where a policy proposal written by officials has been basically launched, and it's been marketed quite systematically. There have been so-called public consultations, and they have been steered through. For example, the co-governance proposals were steered through by the leader of the Te Partnership Plan implementation group, and she was a fairly senior councillor, and she organised public consultations. They were nothing of the sort. They were just marketing. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to do it. And people came away very unhappy about those sorts of techniques being used. Simultaneously, I can recall occasions where I've been to public consultations and not an official, but an elected member has said, there's a lot of controversy over this particular issue. And these are the range of views on council at the moment, and clarified each position quite carefully, and then stood back and said, what do you people think? What do you all want? What would you prefer? What do you think would be wisest for the children? What would be a very good mokapuna decision? And you get an entirely different tone. Suddenly people really enjoy being respected and trusted, and they pour out their hearts. And the people recording the outcomes of those meetings were able to identify 2, 3 distinct positions, identified the values behind those positions, and later on, when their report went back to council, they presented it with great integrity. So I've seen the whole range of games that people play, and you're quite right to describe them in fairly in pretty abrupt terms. But I would say that people of good intent and with decency, and in particular with good meeting facilitation, can suspend their normal role, say as an expert engineer or as an elected member. They can suspend their status and say to people, this is the range of thinking on this issue at the moment. What do you think? It's quite extraordinary how clever people can be.
It's extraordinary, but it's not necessarily unique. In terms of what Arge Nost called the mastermind. And they did these experiments in England where, you know how you can have like a jar of jelly beans and people will guess how many jelly beans are in the jar? What they did is they took the averages from everybody's prediction and they found that the very average from everybody, no matter who they were, no matter where they came from, the average thought was the correct answer, right? People were always hovering around the correct answer. And he gave this idea where one person, like, so for example, you and I today, Reynold, we have a mastermind of two. Your thoughts, my thoughts, together, creating something that either of us may not have been able to elucidate as accurately or as sparsely as perhaps we might on our own. We've actually increased the power of our mind. And what he said to me was that getting this mastermind to expand, and as you noted with council meetings, once people are allowed to participate, it comes from the old philosophical principle that if you do not give people responsibilities, they will become irresponsible. If you give people responsibilities, on the other hand, they tend to be more responsible with it, rather than just being taken care of, okay, go along to get along. And these two mindsets that really come into play here was, as we discussed, the bureaucratic mindset, which is, I think, the head of the Auckland hospital during the swine flu thing says, we have a framework and we must stick to it. That is the bureaucratic mindset. If you had to really put it into words, sorry to quote a person from the Auckland District Board of Health, maybe not the best representative for that sort of statute, but the other mindset is the entrepreneurship mindset. Okay. The entrepreneur is very, very different to normal people. They're frequently classified as being ADHD because they are clever. They can think about multiple things, even contradictory things simultaneously. They have high energy and they have high creativity. Now, when you're the head of a meeting and you're of the entrepreneurial mindset, what you're capable of doing is ingesting large quantities of information, processing it appropriately, giving accolades to those people who have produced that information, and coming up with a plan that incorporates all these new ideas into something that actually works. Doesn't necessarily to make people happy, but it works. That's the whole idea. One is we have a framework and we must stick to it, and the other is let's find out what works by getting everybody to contribute.
Yes. You interesting. You put your finger on one of the key distinctions, the big changes that occurred in the history of philosophy, where up to from Socrates and Plato onwards, we had a very, very focus on virtue, on serving people, identifying what was right, and regarding that as your duty to deliver on those virtues, on those rights. When Kant came along, Immanuel Kant, he said, well, hold on, that's fine, but only as far as when you actually start to implement those ideas. Wouldn't it also be wise when you're planning to take account of the consequences, the outcomes? What's the pragmatic check against those ideas of virtue? And it's got to be, unfortunately, from my perspective, I left the study of philosophy very, very late, but it would have been extremely helpful to me earlier on, because I set up a university at one point, and some of the responsibilities involved are quite colossal. It would have been great for me to understand that it's important to give not just attention to what your duty is, what the virtues you should display and the rights of the situation, but also to be able to say, look, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, these are the outcomes that this university ought to create. And it happened to be in Abu Dhabi. And of course, that is a community that's building itself. It's got to generate intellectual capacity, planning capacity, leadership capacity in all aspects of the economy and of social services simultaneously. So using that balanced approach of both pragmatic outcomes, consequences, and what's actually right, what are virtuous things to do, what duty does an organisation like a university have, and getting the balance right is very important. So that brings me to another aspect of decision making we haven't touched on much at all, and that is making a systematic appreciation of the empirical evidence that relates to the area that you're working on. Mm-hmm. I've noticed at local government planning level, very few people have, to be a bit unkind, they don't have the education to understand the power of empirical evidence. That is, appreciate all the outcomes in the past and what's been tried and what the measurable outcomes were. And so when you come to get to the stage of putting together your plans, you actually articulate key performance areas with the sort of evidence that you're going to collect as you proceed. So at the end of the planning cycle, typically late in the year, and you're starting to plan for next year, you actually go through and pull the numbers out of what's been going on. You pull the numbers out and say, we did fairly well, but we could have done a lot better. Let's be much sharper in these areas. And a new performance indicator would be this, and it would suggest that there should be at least 80% achievement against these benchmarks. My point here is that these things are all learnable, and the level of learning in these areas is quite limited. I've got to say that at the local pragmatic level here at Rotorua Lakes Council, our mayor has a degree in management. So a lot of these forms of mixed appreciation are at her fingertips. She's aware of the power of knowledge in these various areas, and she's increasingly expecting that of our officials. But secondly, our chief executive, the one that's just been appointed in recent times, with the going of the previous administration, the chief executive went as well, been replaced. And the fellow that's come in, he's been working in many places around the world and has got a sophisticated appreciation at an MBA sort of level, all the different functional areas of an organisation. He's across all of them, and he knows what performance indicators are, and he can measure using empirical evidence the nature of the outcomes. So it's been quite refreshing watching the change as that sort of thinking is gradually infused through the organisation. Sorry, that's a bit of a tangent compared to your appreciation of matters, but that's how I've come to think after decades and decades of leadership challenges in different sorts of organisations.
It's tangents are what the Vinny Eastwood show excels at. For example, we're talking about the concept of objectivity versus ideology. All right. I want everybody to be controlled by a central government and everybody be told what to think, told what to do 24 hours a day and under 24-hour surveillance, and we force them to eat what we want them to eat, we force them to drink what we want them to drink, we'll poison their water supply if it's good for them, that kind of thing. That's ideology, all right? Objectivity is, I don't know what's best for you. You're going to have to find out for yourself, and if you can't find out for yourself, then we're going to have to find out together using objectivity. Okay, versus ideology. Whatever it is what it is. And it isn't what it isn't. And we can find out the answers to the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how. And we can analyse them against whether or not people are just rabbiting on things that they've heard rather than things that they know and have seen and have done. And that gives you a base plate, ostensibly, to make good decision making. If you've got a good ideology, that's not necessarily a bad thing. For example, objectivity is an ideology, and it's a one that surpasses and can look at its own ideology and go, maybe being objective in this particular case isn't the wrong thing. Let's see if there's any evidence for it. No, objectivity rules again. Okay, there we go. Right, so Now we come down to the point where you can control people with language, okay? This is two types of people called nerds and professionals. And what they've done is they've created what's been called a moat around their industries that are blanketed with certain terms, languages, techniques, and things of that nature so that other people who are ordinary won't be able to comprehend what the hell this person's talking about, and therefore will abdicate their own ability to make the decisions on those particular topics in favour of a professional or an expert doing it for them, usually at an exorbitant price, usually for a long period of time, maybe till the end of time, unless you decide that you're going to learn how to do that stuff for yourself, little by little, bit by bit. About 100 hours is all it takes to get a really decent grasp of something. That's 20 minutes a day. You want to become an expert at something? That's 10,000 hours. That's 4 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 to 4 years. Okay? That's how you look at it. What are you spending your time doing, and what are you actually getting out of that time? Are you now able to make clearer decisions that are more beneficial for you, your organization, and the people subsequently under your control? Or are you simply paying somebody who you just believe and have faith in, much like a religious figure, to just come down and save us all with your knowledge of stuff? Thank you. Thank you so much. Here's lots of money. And it comes down to what my, what was his name? Dr. Bill Deagle. He used to be like one of the heads of medical research for the National Security Agency of the United States. And he brought me on his show one time. And he said, Vinny, the two smartest people in the world in terms of profession are comedians and theoretical physicists. And I told him it's probably for the same reason. They take large, seemingly contradictory sets of data, and they work out their existence into an equation that can be comprehended. An equation, mind you, that is so simple that it's ridiculous, and it makes you laugh. All right? Theoretical physicists and comedians. So when we're talking about these decision makings and philosophy and things of that nature, we are talking to a population that is largely uneducated. If we have a look at the global IQ stacks, IQ is very important for a certain task, but it's not the only form of intelligence. It's like 1 of 7, right? IQ ain't going to help you dunk a basketball like Shaq, bro. All right? IQ isn't going to help you feel somebody's emotional state just by looking at them and reading their body language necessarily. It has your ability to process complex information and make sense of it in a logical manner. That's it. Now, in North Korea, that's communist North Korea, the average IQ was 110. Their children are capable of taking apart and reassembling an automatic weapon blindfolded. Their children can do that with an average IQ of 110. New Zealand children are capable of operating TikTok a bit. You know, that's kind of the difference and distinction that we're talking about. So when you're communicating to the general population of New Zealand, have a look at the statistics. We're on average 96.5. That might have gone up recently to 96.8. 85 is a chimp, okay? We're not the brightest cookies in the world in this country, and I noticed with the political marketing and techniques and things of that nature that they are kept very, very simple. They do not use complex language. They do not use something that really makes you have to put in 100 or 10,000 hours to become an expert in order to be able to get the communication. And this is what John Ansell, who used to run the ad campaigns for National and Labour and lots of big companies, said to me, Vinny, your political message has to be understood, read and understood while somebody's driving past it at 100 kilometres an hour. Right? Weaponizing the language, ostensibly, making sure that it penetrates straight through so that people are capable of understanding exactly what it is in the simplest language possible. And one of these politicos came up to John and said, John, why do you always try to dumb things down? To which he obviously replied, why do you always try to complicate them up? all right, because you're trying to protect your income and you're trying to keep everybody down. And so it's just like, let's just be simple. Let's just be cool. It doesn't matter if you're not quite as intelligent in the IQ thing. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're stupid. And it doesn't mean you don't have common sense. What it means is that I have to explain things in a particular way so that you will be able to understand it. And that is the respect that intelligent people must show to those people who aren't as intelligent. Not because you're superior, but you're more capable of taking care of those people so that they don't get scammed and hurt and used and abused by other people of intelligence who do not possess something that is more important than intelligence, a moral conscience. Thus is our obligation. Reynold, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today on the show. Residents and ratepayers of Rotorua, is it? Rotorua residents and ratepayers?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it's on the Foshbook, ladies and gentlemen.
We meet tomorrow night. We've got a gathering at Hennessy's Bar tomorrow night. If anybody's listening and would like to come along, and it might be of interest to you to know the sorts of questions. We've got an elected councillor coming along, and he is going to do his best to answer incredible questions. I'll just read you a couple to give you a sense. Has Rotorua New Zealand, which is our marketing company, has it been directed to end Crankworks' annual subsidy? Second question, to what extent has insourcing infrastructure management improved its productivity? Next one, how do councils know if the museum restoration is on budget and on time? And finally, with council debt climbing from 296 million in 2022 to 447 million in 2024 and over 500 million in out years, largely due to previous councils' big budget project commitments and the overhang, and the current council decision not to slow or suspend any of them, what plans does council have to retire debt and cut rates? There are there must be 15 questions like that, and we'll be putting those to an elected member of council tomorrow night. And that's what we do. That's what we do. We're very pragmatic. We're very focused on how's this going to make a difference? How's it going to improve ratepayers' experience? So it's all about accountability. That's the word we haven't used a lot today, but it's us exercising a little bit of power to trying to get accountability from our elected members to whom we have given power. So that's what we're on about.
Well, it reminds me of a song one time that I did in the, what was it? Accumulation of power without accountability is no nobility.
Quite. It's a tyranny. It becomes a tyranny.
Yep. Not a terra thigh, not a terra shin, but a tyranny. Now, thank you very much, Reynold, for...
It's been a joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I get that a lot. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us as well. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as we did. You know, told Reynold before the show, let's just be yourself, because if you're being yourself, they'll relax you, and that relaxes the audience, and have fun, because if you're having fun, the audience will too. So I hope to achieve that objective every time, especially for the audience, you, the listeners. Guys, when I became a listener of content like this, it was because there was no alternative to the lie, generally speaking. And you wind up getting turned into some kind of social pariah. You lose all these shallow friendships that you may have had. You may have nostalgias with your family. You might lose your place of employment. You might even lose your place in the world and wonder, where the hell am I going to live? Even how am I going to live? But eventually, you realize that because you're doing the right thing, ladies and gentlemen, following your moral conscience and doing what your will enables you to, everything you need, exactly in the quantity you require, precisely at the time that you need it, will appear. As it is said, when the student is ready, the master will appear. And so I'm glad to know each and every one of you whom I do know, especially DK and Alan Mosdale in the chat there that mod for me. It's like Reynold, I've got the best mods, man. Do you have any idea what the internet is like? Nobody knows how bad it is until you start actually broadcasting and allowing people to share their unsolicited, ignorant, and often sadistic and psychopathic and narcissistic obsession with typing messages to people that they want to get an emotional reaction out of. And these mods, they do the work. Oh, look at this, but block! And they're gone. It's just like, it's a constant, it's whack-a-mole out there, man. And these guys, they wield the hammer of Thor, but they keep it low-key. Now, we have... of course, the last thing I want to mention, ladies and gentlemen, is to you, the audience, please, if you can, go to thevinnyeastwoodshow.com, pretty please, with a flower on top, pretty please, thevinnyeastwoodshow.com, and start donating if you can today, particularly through that Patreon, PayPal, and Kiwi Bank accounts that we have there. And once you are a member, you will have a whole bunch of exclusive goodies, including access to me directly. Do you need to learn how to do something? Vinny does like 14 different jobs just on a single radio broadcast, including the pre-production and post-production and production itself. Maybe he's simple enough to be able to teach me how to do these things for myself so that I don't need Vinny Eastwood anymore. No, I don't need anybody else anymore. That is what the principle of management is all about. So with the last 17 years of being supported by the audience, you've never let me down, and anything I've ever needed has come directly from you right when I needed it. For example, in approximately 54 minutes, I am going to go down and I am going to get my windshield replaced because it has a big crack in it, and so I'm going to be heading on down there, folks, and we're going to crack into it. So thank you very much for all your support. That windshield's going to cost me like, what, $500, I think, maybe 600 or something. So any help that you could be in that regard, guys, please go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and check out our great sponsors, reopen.nz, holdenhealthcare.com, and of course donate through the Patreon and Kiwi Bank and all of that jazz as well. With that being said, as they say in Israel, without further ado, that is the show. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Reynold, and we'll see you again sometime, folks.
Thanks, Vinny.
Gentlemen, I brought you here to discuss the Eastwood problem.
It may be necessary to penetrate the Vinny Eastwood show.
The Vinny Eastwood show.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Well, I've been working on a new Vinny scene. I think that might be the kind of penetration we need.
The Vinny Eastwood show. Sundays, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Live on Ground Zero Radio.